Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live, coming at you on a Monday, the Feast of St. Clair. Happy Feast of St. Clair, everybody. To all the Claires out there listening, happy Feast Day. And to all the listeners out there, thank you for tuning in today for 2 hours of answering the strongest objections to God. That is the topic that we are going to have on the show today. If you would like to get in on the conversation, the number to call is 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884 to talk about objections to God's existence. Obviously, the main person to ask a question about that would be probably an atheist or an agnostic. You don't have to be an atheist or an agnostic. You could also be a Catholic, a Christian, someone of any sort of background of beliefs. But if you have this objection in your mind that you just don't know how to answer for yourself, or if you've been presented with an objection to God's existence by someone else and you don't know how to answer it, give us a call and we will try to get to your questions soon in the show. But answering those questions and, of course, taking us through a few before we get to calls is our very own Catholic Answers staff apologist, our author, speaker, and I would say resident Thomist, probably, resident philosopher of Catholic Answers. Among all the apologists, probably the most Thomistic inclined. I'll stop keeping you waiting. It's Dr. Karlo Broussard. Karlo, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Thomas, I'll embrace that label, man. I'll wear it proudly.
I think a place like Catholic Answers needs someone who will wear that label because, as we'll see in a moment, getting into some of these objections to God's existence, it really requires a really careful, sharp, analytic mind that can dissect and take apart the objections that we're going to tackle here with the kind of precision and clarity that Thomas exhibited.
Yeah, we'll give it a shot. I'll do my best to think through some of the issues posed that we have teed up, but also from whatever issues are posed to us by our callers who call in today, whether atheist, agnostic, or, as you mentioned, a believer who's struggling with a particular objection that they're trying to work through. More than happy to take those calls. I will say that these issues, a little forewarning for our listeners, these issues do involve some philosophical thinking. And so it does stretch the mind a tad bit, and we engage in some intellectual calisthenics. But I will do my best to present the answers to the questions and refuting some of the objections in a way that is digestible for the popular audience listening. So just a little forewarning of that. And I will say this, I did not pick this topic. The team picked it. So for whatever philosophical headiness that comes out of my mouth, do not blame me. You blame the CA team.
Okay. Karlo,
I just had to make that disclaimer, man.
Karlo clearing the air right here. But I know you're excited to get into it because nothing, I see you when you talk about these things. Nothing really gets your juices flowing more than when we really dive into the heady arguments.
Yeah, I do enjoy engaging this field or branch of apologetics, what we call philosophical apologetics. I wrote my dissertation for my doctorate in philosophy within this field of natural theology. So I very much appreciate these issues, and I appreciate the objections and the challenges because it does force the believer to really think about these issues in a very careful and clear way. And it prompts us to get a better understanding of our own beliefs concerning God.
Yeah, and I have also found that that number one, that's very much true. That when you have to work the mind a little bit to understand the doctrines of Christianity, it is very rewarding when you finally figure that out. But also, it can prompt a greater love of God when you understand better the reasons why we believe in him and what he actually is, what we do and don't believe about him. That can prompt a much greater love and devotion for God. And that's really what the exercise of theology and apologetics should all be directed towards, right?
Thomas, man, you're singing my song here, brother. I would love eventually one day to write a book on the pastoral implications of apologetics. And one of the chapters would involve philosophical apologetics and how whenever we come to a deeper philosophical understanding of who and what God is, as classically conceived as pure existence itself, pure actuality itself, and his absolute perfection of not being bound or limited in any way, it has major implications for us pastorally. Like, just for example, when you consider that God is more intimate to us than we are to ourselves, insofar as being the creator and the source of all being, he is the very cause of my existence. So he doesn't cause me by acting on me from the outside, like I'm acting or causing you to hear me right now by acting on you from the outside. Rather, God causes us from within, because he is the source of our very existence, which is the most inner aspect of my very reality and my very being. And so when we come to understand that, we see that even God, from a philosophical perspective, is intimate to us, close to us, closer than we could possibly even imagine, because conceiving God as the source of my very being is something that goes beyond the boundaries of our imagination. We literally can't imagine anything that would be that intimate to us, because it's going beyond the boundaries of physical reality. And whenever you think through that, you say, you come to the conclusion, well, man, God is intimate to me, even insofar as he is creator, more intimate to me than anything else. And then we push that a little further. And once you understand that my very existence here and now at every moment I exist is ultimately dependent on this creator, the source of my very being and existence, well, then that leads me to a sense of gratitude. I come to realize how radically dependent I am upon God for my existence, and that prompts me, motivates me, moves me to have gratitude, to say thanks to the creator for actually sustaining me in existence at every moment I exist, a sustaining of existence for which I have nothing to contribute. Literally nothing. So to quote St. Paul here, to mesh theology and philosophy, there is nothing for me to boast in insofar as I am existing. It is entirely God. And also, it's gratuitous. It's a gift. There's nothing I do to demand a right to exist right here and right now from God, but yet he sustains me in being. And so you can see how the philosophical understanding of God as the source of all being outside of himself and the cause of my existence here and now at every moment I exist leads and has pastoral implications, can move me spiritually to relate to the creator in a proper way.
Beautifully said, Karlo. Thank you for that. And we will. I think that really paves some of the groundwork for what we'll get into in a little bit with these questions, as some of the attributes of God that you were naming there are going to help us clear the air when we answer some of the questions that we're about to get into. Before we do that, I do want to clear something else up for any listeners. Karlo has been saying my name, Thomas. That is because I am not Cy Kellett, as you may have noticed. Cy is out today. He is on vacation, going back to his hometown of Boston. He will be back shortly. Tomorrow? Will he be back tomorrow? When's Cy going to be? Cy will be back Wednesday, so you'll have to deal with me and then another fill-in host tomorrow. I'm sure we'll do the best we can. Pray for Cy and his travels, that he will be back with us before you know it. And second thing to clear up is I mentioned that Karlo was a Thomist, and then I mentioned another Thomas. I wasn't talking about myself. There's no philosophical school named after me. Thank goodness. We'd be in a really sorry way if there was. Of course, I was referring to St. Thomas Aquinas, the famous, probably, depending on who you ask, the greatest theologian of all time. Just that, no big deal. And Karlo, of course, as a Thomist, he's going to draw heavily from St. Thomas's work and school of thought and everything. And that's rather appropriate because he's very well known, probably most well known for demonstrating God's existence in 5 different ways, just in one article of his great work, the Summa Theologiae. So with that ready to go, I think we can dive into what St. Thomas thought was probably the strongest objection to God's existence. Yeah. It's rather telling that when Thomas takes up the question of does God exist, of whether God exists, he begins by giving this objection. He thinks that this is about as good as it gets. If God exists, then there'd be no evil in the world, whether sin or suffering, because if he was all good and all powerful, he'd eliminate any evil. I think the way God puts it is if God's infinitely good, then the opposite of that infinite thing can't exist. It would just be utterly annihilated. But if we look around, we see there's evil. Therefore, open and shut case, God doesn't exist.
Yeah. So in response, I think it's important to highlight the hidden premise or the hidden assumption within that argument. Namely, one who has the power to eliminate evil must do so. Otherwise, that agent is not good. Now, I argue that's a false assumption. And so the question becomes, well, why is it false? Well, there are a few ways in which we can answer that question and go about this. And the first of which, Thomas, is that the obligation to eliminate evil arises if and only if the elimination of evil is due in justice. All right. So when it comes to elimination of, so the question, all right, so why is it that it is not unjust or is permitted for God to permit? Why is it reasonable for God to permit the presence of evil, whether in moral form, that would be sin, or physical form, right? Like suffering and evils within nature, blindness or defects and corruption and death. Well, think about this. Moral evil arises from our finitude as a finite rational agent, right? So think about this, Thomas. Only God is his ultimate perfection. Only God is his ultimate life's goal. It's himself. Every other rational being apart from God, like you and me, rational agents, and even angels, we have to make choices in order to achieve our perfection, our goal, our end, right? And so with that nature as a finite rational agent, there comes the possibility of missing the mark and failing to achieve our goal and our perfection. And so, given the fact that moral evil is arising from the finitude, right, the limitations of us being rational agents, when God permits moral evil, it's consistent with who we are as a defectible creature, right? So like, it's part of being a finite rational agent to be defectible. It's part of our nature to have the potential to miss the mark in doing good. I think that's pretty clear. Well, consider this. God is not bound to prevent a defectible creature from defecting, right? So God is not bound to prevent me from failing to miss the mark in my behavior. God is not bound to prevent me from choosing bad things. Why? Because the potential or the possibility of me choosing bad things is part of my nature as a finite, rational agent. I ain't God. And I think that's pretty obvious. And so I have to choose things in order to be perfect. Well, with that comes the possibility to choose things bad for me and lead away from my perfection. And so God is not bound to prevent me, a defectible creature, from defecting. And so again, the elimination of evil, the obligation to eliminate evil would arise if and only if the elimination of evil is due in justice. But God is not bound in justice to eliminate even moral evil. Now, what about physical evil? Well, think about this, Thomas. Physical evil, like defects within material beings. Maybe somebody's born blind. We have corruption where plants die outside, right? Leaves die, trees die, grass dies. Well, it's part and parcel of corporeal material beings to be subject to defect, to be subject to all of these defects we see, which would include suffering for living things, plant, animals, and human beings. Thus, the permission of such defects is consistent with those defectible natures. And remember the principle, God is not bound to prevent defectible creatures from defect. And so to say that God is bound to prevent or eliminate all evil would be to say that God is bound to do something to us that would be over and above our nature, to give us something that would be basically a grace. But God is not bound in justice to give us something over and above our nature. And so therefore, we can conclude, Thomas, that God is not bound to eliminate all evil, whether moral or physical. Again, to quote the maxim, God is not bound to prevent a defectible creature from defecting. Whether that defect is a moral defect, like I'm failing to miss the mark of achieving my perfection and choosing good things, or whether that defect is simply a material being having privations within its nature, like suffering or corrupting and then eventually death. God is not bound to prevent a defectible creature from defects. So the permission of evil is consistent with our natures as a finite, rational agent, a rational agent that's not God, and our nature as a material being. And this is why God is not bound in justice to eliminate all evils. And if that's the case, Thomas, if God is not bound in justice to eliminate all evils, then his permission of evil, whether moral or physical, is not evidence against his goodness. The permission can still be consistent with his goodness. So that's at least one way to go about it. I realize that's kind of deep, but that's sort of getting at the foundational principles as to why God's permission of evil, whether moral or physical, does not count against his goodness.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great way to start off, by getting right into the heart of the matter on that problem of evil question. I realize and that is, though, only half of the answer, as it turns out.
Yes.
And we have to go to a break now, but when we do come back, I do want to dig into the second half of the answer, because there is more that can be said on the problem of evil, and I think should be said, because it is probably the toughest nut to crack for most people who object to God's existence. So we will get into that right after this break. Before we go to that break, I do want to tell you real quick that if you like a bargain, make sure you get on over to shop.catholic.com right now and take advantage of the final day, today, the final day of our Book Lovers $10 book sale. 40 of our very best titles, just $10. Don't procrastinate. This deal ends at midnight tonight Pacific time, I believe. So 9 p.m. Eastern. No, sorry, not 9 p.m. Eastern. It's the other way around. Is it the other way around? I'm totally messing up. Karlo's philosophy messed up my time zones. Whatever. Midnight tonight. Don't gamble. If you think it might end at a different time, don't think that way. Shop.catholic.com. 40 of our very best titles for just $10. That's shop.catholic.com. We will be right back after this.
Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Mother Angelica had a simple goal when she began EWTN: to reach the world with the gospel message. You can enjoy EWTN live TV and radio streams, EWTN news, program schedules, prayers, and devotionals with the EWTN app. We've never wavered from our mandate to proclaim the truth and majesty of the Catholic faith. Thank you for joining EWTN in this mission.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Thomas Graff, the social media manager here at Catholic Answers, taking a break from that duty just for this afternoon to fill in for Cy Kellett, who is on vacation and will be back with us on Wednesday. Joining me is our staff apologist, author, speaker, podcaster, Karlo Broussard. Dr. Karlo Broussard, of course, is probably the best person to bring on for this show, which is refuting the strongest atheist arguments, the strongest objections to God's existence. And Karlo, before we went to the break, we were getting through probably the most important objection, probably the one that is the strongest objection for many, many atheists, and probably even the strongest concept to struggle with for many believers, which is the problem of evil, which is, if God exists, why does evil exist? And so you got through the first answer about how God is not does not owe injustice to prevent a defectible creature from defecting, from doing that. You did a pretty good job explaining that, but that is only half of the answer, or that is only one of the answers that we could give, right? So what is another way that we could answer the problem of evil?
Yeah, and first of all, for our listeners' sake, we got to reestablish what's the target that we're going after here. The target that we're going after is a hidden assumption embedded within this objection from the problem of evil. You know, if God were all good and all powerful, then, he would not permit evil. Like, he's bound in justice to eliminate all evil. That's the assumption. One who has the power to eliminate evil must eliminate all evil. Now, as you pointed out, the first response there is that, well, no, not necessarily, because God is not bound in justice to eliminate all evil, because his permission of evil, whether moral or physical, is consistent with the natures of the things that are experiencing the evils. For us as rational agents other than God, right? We're defectible rational agents, so we can morally defect. So God's permission of the moral defect is consistent with our nature. And even as physical beings, whether for us as human beings, the plant or the animal, God's permission of physical evil is consistent with the nature of physical beings. And so consequently, it is not an injustice. He's not doing something bad for permitting these defects within these sorts of creatures. Now, the second answer as to the question of, or the second critique of the assumption, one who has the power must eliminate all evil, is that that's not necessarily true if there is a good to be achieved by permitting the evil. So if there is a good to be achieved by permitting the evil, then there's no injustice for permitting the evil. And so here's an example, Thomas. So I have, like, for whatever reason in Providence, a weak stomach. When I see blood, I get woozy, man. That happens to me quite often. And so consequently, whenever one of my kids gets some sort of deep cut and blood coming out, and there is a need to clean the wound with peroxide, guess who does the cleaning? My wife does. I do not. And as my wife cleans the wound, she is inflicting pain, suffering, a version or a form of physical evil upon my child whom I love. And I, as the father, have the power to stop my wife from inflicting such evil upon my children as I stand at the threshold of the door, viewing and peeking over her shoulder as to what she's doing. Now I ask you, Thomas, am I a bad father? Is my permission of the inflicting of the evil contrary to justice? Does this make me a bad person?
It does not. No. I mean, to the
Go
child, it might seem that way.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. And the reason why, I think we can all reasonably agree, it would not make me a bad father is because we all intuitively recognize there is a greater good that my permission of the inflicted physical evil is going to lead to. So if there is a good to be achieved by permitting an evil, well, then there is no injustice in permitting that evil. Now, what that good might be in relation to God permitting evil, whether moral or physical, within our lives, well, sometimes we don't know exactly what that good is, but we shouldn't even expect to know what that good is, especially when you have an infinite creator who knows all things past, present, and future, and even all possible things, and has an access to knowledge of what a future good might be that he will bring about that I simply do not have access to. And so just because I might not be able to see a future good that could be brought about from a permitted evil, it doesn't follow that there is no good. Now, that good may very well be a future good that God will bring about from the permitted evil, but also there can just simply be the good of the created whole. That is to say, the good of the manifestation of the finitude of rational agents like myself, right? When I defect, Thomas, when I fail to miss the mark.
It seems like we might have.
Atheist.
Sorry, Karlo, we lost you. We lost you a second there. You were just saying when you defect, when you fail to meet the mark, then we lost you.
Okay, let me try to repeat that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we have you.
All right. So my failure to missing the mark, my defect when it comes to morality and a failure to do appropriate human behavior, that's actually a manifestation of the limitations of my agency, to be a rational agent. It's actually a manifestation of my creatureliness, right? So that manifestation of the limitation of my freedom, of my rational agency, say, could be a good that God wills to preserve and manifest within the created order as a whole. Whenever you have material beings defecting, well, they're functioning as material beings. And that could be a good in and of itself. So we can see that there are some goods that God might bring about and some goods that God might want to manifest from creaturely beings.
All right, that is two great answers from Dr. Karlo Broussard to the problem of evil. And we're just getting started here on this refuting atheist objections. So we'll be right back to tackle more right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Each Catholic is obliged to spread and defend the faith by word and deed. Well, we're here to help. Join special guests Chris Stefanik, Dr. David Anders, Steve Dawson, and all your favorite Catholic Answers apologists this September 25th through 28th in beautiful San Diego for the Catholic Answers Conference. Our theme? Go make disciples. Enjoy 4 days of faith, fun, and fellowship. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 when you register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We are refuting the strongest atheist arguments today on Catholic Answers Live. My name is Thomas Graff. I am the social media manager here at Catholic Answers most of the time, but from time to time I do fill in for Cy Kellett when he's off for one reason or another. That's what I'm doing today as I host today's show with Karlo Broussard, Dr. Karlo Broussard. I got to keep remembering to add that title, Karlo. You earned it, so I'm not gonna take it away from you publicly like that. Dr. Karlo Broussard is joining us today to refute these atheist arguments against the existence of God. And by the way, in our second hour, we will be getting into hopefully some callers' questions. So if you do want to join the conversation, maybe add on your thoughts to something Karlo says or present your own argument that we don't cover, give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884. As I said, though, we'll probably get into more of those in the second hour because we do want to spend the first hour covering some of the really strong objections, so that we can live up to the title, live up to the title of the show that we presented today, refuting the strongest atheist arguments. And so we've gone through, I think, what most would call the strongest atheist argument, the strongest argument against the existence of God, which is the problem of evil. Now, you gave some great, thorough answers to that, Karlo, but I think there's a variant of the question that we still haven't covered. Right. So the first question was basically a question about just God's mere existence. So if God exists, there can't be evil, but there is evil, and so he can't exist. That's just a straight, open-shut question about his existence considered in itself, and you did a great job answering that, as I said. But there's another way that this could be formulated. still a variant of the problem of evil, but it gets to one of God's attributes, which an attribute is just something we can say about God, something that describes him. And one way we would describe him, I think a lot of people who agree on the definition of God would agree that God is considered to be all good, right? All good, all loving. So if God is all good, and if he created everything, so that's two attributes, all good and creates everything that exists, why would evil exist in the world? Wouldn't that mean that God created evil, in which case he actually isn't all good? So now we have a question that's not so much saying evil disproves the existence of God wholesale, but it rather disproves the idea of God being all good.
Well, I would actually say that this version or formulation of the argument from evil does indeed attack the very existence of God. Okay. So generally speaking, if God exists, evil wouldn't exist. Evil exists, therefore God doesn't exist. But the first version that we looked at was an attack against God's permission of evil. Like if God existed, he would not permit evil to be a part of our reality. This particular version of it is attacking God as the creator. God being all good, which is part and parcel of the classical view of God, would not create evil, right? And so the assumption here is that evil is something that's a part of our reality. It's a thing that's existing, so it's argued. And since God creates all things, it would follow that God created evil. So notice the attack is a little bit nuanced here in attacking God as the creator of evil. And if he's creating evil, then it can't be all good. So you can see a distinction between the two lines of argumentation, each of which fall under the broader umbrella of what is called the logical problem of evil. But in response, I've already hinted at it as to the problem of the objection, namely viewing evil as a thing existing. But whenever we reflect upon evil philosophically, Thomas, we come to see that evil is not something like you're there, I'm here, the computer's here, the microphone's here, these things that exist. Evil is not like that. Rather, evil is what philosophers call a privation. Now you're thinking to yourself, what in the world does that mean? Well, that simply means a lack of a due good, given the kind of thing it is. A lack of what ought to be there, given the kind of thing that it is. It's not just a lack of good. Like, for example, Thomas, the tree outside. Do we say that it's bad or evil that the tree can't see outside?
No, I don't think so. I don't think trees are the kind of things that ought to see. Something's gone very wrong if that's the case.
Exactly, right. So whenever we look outside and we say, well, the tree can't see, we don't conclude, oh, that's an evil. Why? Because the lack of the good of seeing, it's not a lack of what ought to be there. It's not a lack of a do good. It's a lack of a good, yeah, sure. But it's not a lack of a do good, given the kind of thing it is. However, if I can't see, would you call that lack of sight a defect or evil?
Yes, I would.
Yes, and the reason is because I'm the kind of thing that ought to be able to see. So evil, whether it be physical evil, like lack of sight in the thing that should be seeing, or even moral evil, whenever there is a lack of due order, whenever I engage in a behavior that's lacking a proper order that ought to belong to it, like, for example, me treating you with respect and dignity and not killing you who are an innocent human being. If I were to violate that order, my action would be lacking a due order in relation to you, Thomas. And so whether we're looking at physical evil, like natural evils, defects like blindness or deafness, say, or even the corruption of the tree outside, right? And when it begins to corrupt and break down, or moral evil, we see that evil is a lack of a do good. Now, we can take that knowledge and we come to see immediately that this objection from the problem of evil in relation to God as the creator falls apart or dissolves, precisely because if evil is a lack of a do good, a lack of being that ought to be there, and God's the source of all being, well then can God create evil? And the answer is no.
Yeah, it wouldn't seem so.
We come to see that evil is not a created thing that's being brought about into existence by the Creator. And so with a proper understanding of what evil is, the objection and the problem dissolves. And so evil being a part of our reality in this way would not be evidence against the all good Creator. Now, I know what's going to come next as a counter argument. Well, Karlo, are you saying that blindness is an illusion and not real and part of our reality? No, I'm not saying that. Blindness is a reality, like it's real. The lack of due sight is a real part of reality. So we're not saying that evil is unreal or an illusion. We're just trying to get at the essence, if I can even say that with evil, but quote unquote essence, the true understanding of what evil is. And then once we see that, then we can see that God in principle cannot create evil, because evil is not a thing to be created. That is to be had in existence.
Mm-hmm. The image that helped me understand this really well, in addition to the image of the eye and the blindness, which is excellent, but the one that really drove it home, at least as relates to God creating, is of a baker and a donut, because when he makes the donut, there's a hole there, right? But he didn't make the hole, like he didn't say, let there be hole, and a hole appeared, right? He made the donut into a ring, and then as a byproduct of that, you had a lack of donut in the middle of it. And so you could kind of draw the analogy with God. God makes things, and everything that God makes, everything that has being is good. But as a byproduct of that, sometimes there's a lack of being where there should be some, just like there's a lack of donut where there should be some. Get rid of donut holes, please. Thank you. And that means that we have evil that exists, even though you can't say that God directly caused it.
Well, I would say God cannot create it, because it's not a thing to be created or a thing to be given, a thing that would have existence to be given from God, the Creator. Mm-hmm. And so this is how we can resolve this apparent incompatibility between God, all good Creator, and evil, quote unquote, existing. You see how that word existing can be ambiguous. So once we disambiguate that and get to a true understanding of what we mean by evil existing, then we can see that evil is not something having existence that's being created by the all-good Creator. Mm-hmm. Now, with regard to another example, I like the philosopher Herbert McCabe gives the example of the hole in the sock, right? Yep. We all got some holy socks, man. And that sock is lacking the wool or the cotton that is due there. And so that's sort of an image to try to get the mind to latch on to what we mean by evil. And once you understand that, again, you come to see that God, in principle, cannot, quote unquote, create evil. So the existence of evil would not be a defeater of an all-good Creator. Exactly.
And so we've covered a lot of ground on the problem of evil, and there's one more thing there was one more objection that we could bring up here, and it's that maybe evil of itself doesn't disprove God's existence. I think you've brought forth some pretty compelling arguments to that point, Karlo, but someone could still look at all the evil in the world and say there's so much pointless evil that it seems likely. It seems hard for me to believe, looking at how much evil is out there. I mean, just turn on the news, right? Scroll social media for 5 minutes. It seems like there's so much pointless evil that God can't or doesn't draw any good out of, that it's likely he doesn't exist. He's not doing that.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things in response here. First of all, it's important to note that this sort of objection is not seeking to disprove the existence of God, but simply trying to provide a rational belief against God, or a rational acceptance of atheism. It's likely God doesn't exist in light of all the quote-unquote pointless evils. Now, in response, I think the first thing to go after here, Thomas, is just that. The assumption that there are, in fact, quote-unquote pointless evils. Now, why would we go after that? And here's the answer. Pointless evils would exist if and only if God doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because think about it. If God existed, well, then there would be no good that he could not bring about. I know that's a double negative. Let me restate it. If God existed, he would be all powerful. So that would mean he could bring about any good that he willed from any permitted evil. And remember our principle a while ago, if there is a good to be brought about from a permitted evil, then there is no injustice in the permission of evil. And so if God existed and he's all powerful, well, then we got it in the bag. He can bring about any good from a permitted evil. And so in that case, Thomas, would the evil be pointless?
No, not anymore.
It wouldn't be pointless because there's a good that the all-powerful God is going to bring about from the permitted evil. And so, but notice that evil will be pointless if and only if God doesn't exist. But isn't that what we're debating in the first place? And it is. So what this objection from pointless, gratuitous evils falls prey to is circular reasoning. So consider this, Thomas. Here, in order to illustrate the circular reasoning, here's the basic dialectic. Why doesn't God exist? The atheist answers, because of pointless evils, at least with regard to this objection. God doesn't exist because of pointless evils. Well, why are there pointless evils? Why do pointless evils even in fact exist? Well, because God doesn't exist. Well, wait a minute. Why doesn't God exist? Oh, because of pointless evils. Well, why are there pointless evils? Because God doesn't exist. You see how we're stuck in an infinite loop here in a circle? So this objection assumes the truth of its conclusion. We call that begging the question or circular reasoning. It's assuming God doesn't exist in order to get the pointless evils, which they think is evidence against God's existence. And so whenever you have an argument that falls prey to circular reasoning, that ain't a good argument, right? And so in my estimation, this objection from what is called, quote unquote, pointless evils or gratuitous evils is actually the easiest one to refute precisely because it begs the question. It's assuming the truth of its conclusion when it's trying to argue for the truth of its conclusion, namely that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, there's a lot loaded into that word pointless, and you did a good job unpacking it there to show that that is the question being begged. Yeah.
Yeah. And one more point, and I know we probably have to go to our last break in this hour, but one thing to note here is, which I mentioned earlier in our conversation, is that for many, they conclude that the evil is pointless because they can see no good to be brought about from the permitted evil. But remember, just because we cannot see some good to be brought about from the permitted evil, it doesn't follow that there is no good, you see? And that we should expect based upon the limitations of our knowledge in relation to an infinite creator who's all-knowing and all-powerful, right? We should expect that there would be some greater good that an infinite creator willed to bring about from a permitted evil that we don't know. So just because we might not be able to see some good to be brought about from a permitted evil doesn't mean the evil is in fact pointless or gratuitous. And so that's another part of the discussion that needs to come into play and for us to be aware of. But again, this is getting to what you just stated, Thomas, that all important phrase there, pointless evils, right? Once we think about that and what that logically entails, we can see how this objection has no persuasive force against the existence of an all-good God.
Well, as Karlo said, we are coming up on the final break of this hour. Before we get to it, I just want to remind you all that we are barreling down on the Catholic Answers Conference happening in about a month and a half now, the end of September 25th to 28th. That weekend, we will welcome some of the nation's most brilliant, eloquent, and engaging Catholic speakers, including Dr. Karlo Broussard, who is joining us right now, who you just heard give some great answers to some atheist objections. And the theme of our conference will be Go Make Disciples. It will be how we can live out our Lord's call to preach the gospel to all nations. That's a daunting task for some of us, present company included, but a weekend here in San Diego at this conference will equip you and give you a good old shot of motivation to carry that mission out with joy. So as I said, Karlo will be one of our speakers. Also, our keynote will be Chris Stefanik. We will also welcome Dr. David Anders from EWTN's Call to Communion. Just added, Dr. Amy Hamilton. We'll also welcome Steve Dawson of our good friends at St. Paul Street Evangelization, Father Paul Check, Catholic Answers live host, and today's absentee, Cy Kellett, and all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists, including Dr. Karlo Broussard. You can still use promo code EARLY, EARLY, early at checkout to save $50 off of your conference ticket at CatholicAnswersConference.com. That is those three words all together, CatholicAnswersConference.com. Book your tickets now. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 off of your ticket. We will be right back to continue with Refuting Atheist Arguments right after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
With only $200, a garage-turned studio, and little else, EWTN founders Mother Angelica launched what is now the world's largest religious media network. As we prepare to celebrate EWTN's 44th anniversary, we are reminded of Mother Angelica's bold faith, the power of the gospel, and the incredible support of our EWTN family who make this mission possible. God bless you, and thank you, Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Social media manager at Catholic Answers, Thomas Graff. That's what I do. That's my name. And I am filling in for Cy Kellett today as he vacations to Boston. He will be back with us on Wednesday. In the meantime, we are continuing with our refutations of the strongest atheist arguments with my good friend, colleague, Dr. Karlo Broussard, joining us all the way from Oklahoma to take on these pesky atheist arguments. And we just got through dealing with, I think, about as thoroughly as one possibly can, the strongest of these strong atheist arguments. Not a pesky one at all. Definitely one that needs to be grappled with, the problem of evil. And we did cover a lot of ground. But Eric in Fort Worth, Texas, who is watching on YouTube, has been waiting patiently on the lines. He called in while Karlo was going through some of those answers to the problem of evil. And Eric does want to give his own 2 cents, maybe a follow-up question to those arguments that you were giving. So, Eric, do we have you?
Hi, is this Dr. Karlo?
Yes. How can I help you, buddy?
Yeah, hi,
what you got?
Hi, how's it going?
All right.
Yeah, so 2 points I was calling in for. One, all the arguments that you gave for the problem of evil can also be given for the problem of worshiping a devil. There is no, all you got to do is change God for devil and you can have the exact same argument. And as for the gratuitous part of things being viewed as evil or unknown reasons, they're being viewed as evil because the sentient creatures that are being affected by the actions of this God, the God didn't bother to inform them and educate them as to the reasons why. And also the God didn't bother to ask for their consent to be part of this experiment. So if you kill your son for a good reason, for a future good reason to help your daughter, you're still a murderer for killing your son.
Okay.
And also the bullet points here are also bringing up the idea of addressing atheism. Atheism isn't something that exists. It's a man-made enemy that you guys invented.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot here, Eric. So let's see if we can take one at a time. So with regard to your first point, with regard to the arguments that I gave could justify, as I heard you, if I heard you correctly, worshiping the devil. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the exact same moral excuse that you give for the immoral actions of this God or the moral assessment of this God for allowing evil, you could just argue that it's the devil and you don't have to change anything at all about anything you said.
Well, why would that be the case? How would it be that I could just input the devil in the same line of reasoning would follow.
For the example that I gave, you just gave the perfect excuse on how to justify murdering your son for future good for your daughter.
Okay, all right. So I see you're connecting those two things. Okay, good point.
Yes.
Now, with regard to
consent from moral assessment.
Okay, with regard to that example of me killing my son, say, to somehow bring about a greater good for my daughter, the problem there, Eric, would be that particular action of taking the life of an innocent human being would indeed be an evil in and of itself. The greater good that I, as an agent, would seek to bring about would in no way make that particular activity good, because the activity, first and foremost, right out the gate, is already of itself intrinsically evil. And so if you're going to apply that to God and say, well, this particular effect that God permits or even causes cannot be justified for some greater good to be brought about, you would have to shoulder the burden of proof in order to show that that effect is intrinsically evil, which even an all good God could not bring about. Now, my arguments earlier, Eric, were attempting to show that the permission, not the direct causation or even indirect causation of moral evil, is not contrary to God's goodness, but is consistent with the nature that he created us with. So that was my argument, that the permission of the moral evil, that the permission of the physical evil is not intrinsically wrong or contrary to the goodness of a moral agent. Now, you may disagree with that, and we could have a back and forth conversation as to whether the permission of a moral or physical evil by a moral agent is intrinsically wrong. But your argument would succeed, namely, that you cannot appeal to a greater good to justify some behavior. That argument would succeed if and only if God's permission of moral and physical evil is in fact intrinsically wrong. There you would have a direct one-to-one correspondence of the example you gave, where me taking the life of an innocent human being to bring about a greater good, it doesn't work, precisely because taking the life of an innocent human being is of itself intrinsically wrong. So further conversation would have to be had on that score concerning, again, getting to that initial question, which I've already addressed, whether God's permission of moral or physical evil is intrinsically contrary to goodness. I presented arguments earlier that they are not, that such permission is not contrary to goodness. And so therefore it's not intrinsically evil. And if that is true, then your appeal to the example wouldn't work. Any thoughts in response?
Yes, you removed the moral assessment by the person that was affected by the evil action that God did to that person. If you murder me, you are an evil person or a deity or a devil or anything like that. I wasn't informed of your strategy for me to be educated on that process, and then I can consent to go along with that plan. So you removed giving me enthusiastic, informed consent in the process. That makes you a murderer by definition. It doesn't matter if you created me. It doesn't matter if you're the moral reference point of where morality comes from. You murdered me without my consent, and it seems like your moral system is removing consent in your moral assessment, which is a broken moral system.
Yeah, so one thought in response there, Eric, would be even if you were to consent for me to take your life, it would still be immoral for me to take your life, precisely because our consent is not the end-all, be-all, and final arbiter of good and bad behavior. It's our nature that determines that, and that nature came from the Creator. And so that would be sort of the heart of the conversation moving forward. But thank you for your call, man.
Thanks for your call, Eric. Unfortunately, as you can hear, the music is starting, and so we will have to bring that conversation to a close. Sorry that we got you right at the end of the hour there. But we would welcome another call later that we could continue the conversation on. It's been a great first hour talking with you, Karlo, about arguments for atheism, and we are going to continue that very same conversation on the other side of this break. You ready to do it?
Let's do it, man.
All right, don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this break to continue addressing the strongest arguments of atheism. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I like to say sometimes the show's so nice we decided to do it twice. 2 whole hours of answering the strongest atheist arguments, refuting the strongest atheist arguments with Dr. Karlo Broussard, our staff apologist, as I said at the open, our staff Thomist, probably the best equipped or most enthusiastic for this kind of topic of getting to the heart of the really big questions, the really deep questions that require, some philosophical nuance and some mental brain work. Mental brain work, that's redundant. So some real mental energy
Actually,
to get
it's
through.
not redundant.
No?
It's not redundant.
I suppose
because the
not.
brain is different than the mind, right?
All
Because
right.
the mind is a spiritual principle of us as rational animals. Go! We got some serious lightning going on here.
Oh man,
Sorry
I'm
if you
jealous.
heard that.
No, we didn't hear anything.
So anyway, the point is you are spot on, Thomas, with regard to the mental calisthenics and the philosophical thinking of how important it is and sort of the fruits that it bears, right? And the importance of reality about God and who we are. So here's an example, Thomas. Consider the previous caller from the last hour, where he was making an argument that our consent is a necessary condition for God to bring about some effect within our lives, whether that be by way of direct causation or permission. Now, if we take that assumption and that principle and think about it, we have to ask ourselves the question, well, how would it be the case that my consent would be the necessary condition for God to do something in my life? That would seem to make God bringing him down to the level of a fellow creature like myself, right? Because think about this, Thomas. If God is God and he is the creator of all things outside of himself, well, then there is nothing that would be a condition for him to be creating things and bringing things about, much less my own consent. So notice how that objection from our previous caller is starting off, getting out of the gate, so to speak, with a false conception of God as creator. Because again, if God does exist and he is the creator, well, then there is nothing that would have to be or be a necessary condition for him to bring about some effect, much less my consent. So you can see how even that objection itself prompts us to begin thinking about the very nature of God and what he would be if he did exist as the infinite reality. And then also, in turn, it prompts us to think about ourselves as creatures, that there is nothing on the creaturely side of the equation that would demand or require something of God and be a necessary condition for God to even bring about some effect. So I just wanted to share that to emphasize and highlight the point that you're making, that these issues are very deep, require some effort, but I think it's fruitful thinking because it does bring about certain truths about God, ourselves, and our relation to God.
Yeah, well, look at Karlo proving me right away that he loves to just jump right into these things and chop it up philosophically for us and serve us a nice steak dinner of truth. I think that metaphor works, I'm pretty sure. Well, if you would like to get in on the conversation here, we are happy to take more calls this hour. The number to call is 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. If you want to get in on the conversation, present what you think is a pretty strong argument for atheism, maybe have a little back and forth dialogue like we had with the previous caller, give us a call at 888-318-7884. Before we do that, I think that this is a worthwhile objection to get into because this is another pretty strong one. It relates to the problem of divine hiddenness. It's not the problem of divine hiddenness itself. That simply states, like, if there is God, why isn't he making his existence more obvious to us? This is again, like I said, it's a related question, but basically it says, if God exists, why are there honest atheists? Wouldn't God ensure that everyone at least comes to know that he exists so that they can make a choice to follow him or not?
Yeah, so this is a version of the problem of divine hiddenness, sort of the version that we might call the problem of the epistemic gap or the knowledge gap, where there's this gap between an atheist mind, the intellect, and the target of the truth. It's a version of the problem of evil because there is a form of defect here where the intellect falls short of coming to know the truth. So there's a defect there. And so the question becomes, is God unloving? Is this falling short in intellectual error evidence against an all good God? Well, a similar line of reasoning that we employed earlier, Thomas, applies here as well. God's permission of intellectual error would count against his goodness if and only if he were bound to prevent us from intellectual error. But I argue he is not bound to prevent us from intellectual error because by nature, as a finite, rational agent and as a rational animal, I am subject to defect when it comes to knowing truth. I am naturally capable and subject of falling short as when it comes to knowing what is real and what is true. And given that possibility of falling short of truth, the possibility of having intellectual error as a rational animal, it follows from that God is not bound in justice to prevent me from that intellectual error and to prevent me from that defect. Why? Because the way he's relating to me is consistent with my nature as a finite, rational agent. So the permission of the intellectual error, him not making his existence known in such a way that there's no possibility whatsoever for me to doubt it, it's not an injustice to me. It's simply God relating to me according to my nature. And added with that, as we mentioned earlier, that given that this is not intrinsically an injustice or an evil to permit me to fall into intellectual error, there is a greater good that he wills to bring about from that permitted intellectual error. Now, what might that greater good be? It might be some specific good that he wills to bring about, but I can think of one here, Thomas, and that is the good of rational inquiry. Like rational inquiry, the angels, they don't have to inquire about things. They just know it. Upon their creation, God infuses the knowledge within their minds, infuses the whatness of things, right? They just know it. They don't have to reason from like A, B to C. That's called rational inquiry. But that belongs to us as human beings. That's natural for us, Thomas. And so insofar as God wills rational inquiry, he wills the possibility of falling short of truth, of intellectual error. Well, rational inquiry is a good in and of itself. So insofar as God wills the good of rational inquiry, it comes with it. It's part and parcel. It's wrapped up within it, at least the possibility of intellectual error. And so we can see that rational inquiry itself is a good that God wills, and that justifies his permission of intellectual error. He is not bound in justice to prevent us human beings from defect, especially in light of the fact that we are defectible creatures when it comes to truth. And so this at least shows that intellectual error, an honest inquirer who's falling short of the truth, cannot in principle count as evidence against an all-good God, because God is not bound in justice to us to prevent us, a defectible creature, from defecting, at least when it comes to knowing the truth.
Okay, can I say where like the next objection that comes to my mind when I hear that is that that is very convincing when you to hear you say like, yeah, God is not bound in justice to make his existence perfectly abundantly clear to everyone, even an honest atheist who's really looking for just the truth wherever it leads him. God is not restricted in any sense to have to do that, whether restricted by his own nature or by something outside him. But that wouldn't even make sense. Regardless, so that makes sense. God's not bound in justice. But the objection that comes to my mind would be, well, what about just God as being all loving? Wouldn't he want to go beyond what is required by justice in order to make himself known perfectly to not perfectly known, but just make himself known with certainty to everyone who looks for him? Wouldn't God want to bridge that gap? That what did you call it before? The gap, the epistemic gap.
The epistemic
right?
gap, or the knowledge gap.
Yeah. Wouldn't God want to do that regardless of any questions of what he owes to us or not?
Well, think about this. If he had and must go beyond what is due in justice or not due in justice, well, then it wouldn't be love because it would be justice. It wouldn't be mercy because it would be justice. And so that would be the first problem with the objection. It's confusing the categories of justice and love. To demand that God do something beyond justice is to demand that God be just, right? So it is true that love and mercy and the manifestation of love and mercy does indeed go beyond what justice requires. But if you make an argument that God is bound to do that, well, then you're confusing the categories. It would no longer be mercy or pure gratuitous love to go beyond the boundaries of justice. So that's my first thought in response there. I had another thought, but it's slipping my mind currently because I'm a bit distracted by the thunderstorms outside.
Well, you know what? Why don't we go to our first break, and you can take that break to try to remember where you were going with that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good time for Karlo to finally run out of steam there. We'll take a quick break, and Karlo can gather his thoughts again. Man, I don't envy, what's going through his mind right now as he tries to tackle all these objections. It's quite impressive. In the meantime, do you like a bargain? If so, make sure you get on over to shop.catholic.com right now and take advantage of the final day of our Book Lovers $10 book sale. 40 of our very best titles, including some authored by our very own Dr. Karlo Broussard. 40 of our very best titles for just $10. Just $10 each. You'll see them on shop.catholic.com when you go and you see the little $10 sign next to a certain listing of a book. That's one that you can get until midnight tonight. Midnight tonight is when this deal ends. That's shop.catholic.com to take advantage of our $10 book sale. Shop.catholic.com. We'll be right back after this.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
There is tremendous power in prayer because when we acknowledge that we don't have the power, but God does, things then begin to move for our good. Remember Matthew 19:26. But Jesus looked at them and said to them, "With men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible." Now that's power.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We are refuting the strongest atheist arguments that we could drum up for this 2 hours of Catholic Answers Live with Dr. Karlo Broussard, Catholic Answers apologist, author, speaker. You can catch him at our conference at the end of next month, at the end of September, CatholicAnswersConference.com. And you can ask him in person there about your atheist argument, about an argument against God's existence that you think is convincing, or you can ask him right here by calling 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884 to jump in the conversation and give us what you think is a strong atheist argument and let Karlo at it. But before we went to the break, we were in the middle of answering one of our atheist objections, which was basically that if God exists, why doesn't everyone who honestly seeks him out come to believe in him? And we got one answer, which was that God is not bound in justice, does not owe that knowledge to everyone that he creates. But then we started wondering, well, maybe wouldn't God just want to do that out of love? Wouldn't God go beyond what justice demands? And Karlo gave us one answer, but you had another one for us as well, right?
Yeah, well, actually two things. I will say this, that with regard to the knowledge gap problem, God does make himself manifest known throughout creation in a way that's enough or sufficient for somebody to actually come to know that he exists. So it's not like he's entirely hidden. He has revealed himself enough through nature. Now, of course, that doesn't totally address the problem. Well, what if somebody in fact falls short and still is unable to see that evidence? Well, I think here's where we can appeal to that part of the question or the objection that appealed to honest atheists. It's part and parcel of Catholic teaching, and I think it's just rooted in good thinking about God, that if someone falls short intellectually of coming to know that God exists due to no fault of his own, and he's honestly seeking truth in the ways that he knows how, then God's not going to hold that individual accountable. There are all sorts of factors that would come into play for which a person would not be responsible as to why the intellect is not hitting the target of the truth of God's existence. And if there are such factors for which the person is not responsible and his intellect is falling short, God's not going to hold him accountable for that, assuming that within his mind and within his heart, he's honestly pursuing truth and goodness and living in accord with that truth and goodness as he comes to know it. And this, of course, gets to the church's teaching of the possibility of salvation outside the visible boundaries of the Catholic Church. And so we can quell the fear, I think, that is the driving motivation behind this objection, right? We got all these honest inquirers and they can't come to see the conclusion that God exists. Does that mean they're going to be damned, right? And I think that's often the fear here. And the church says, no, not necessarily, and provides a rationale as to how that would work out. Now, I do think we can say that at the end of everybody's lives, that epistemic or knowledge gap will indeed be bridged, where everybody will come to know that God exists. But again, for those who come to know that truth and were responsible for their lack of knowledge of that truth prior to it, well, then they're going to be held accountable. But for those people who come to know that truth at death and they weren't responsible for their lack of knowledge of that truth prior to death, well, then God's not going to hold them accountable. And so in the end, all will come to know that God exists, and God will judge everyone accordingly in accord with justice concerning what they were responsible for, what they weren't responsible for.
That's a great way to put it. I heard Joe Heschmeyer say on this program one time that he said God judges us based on what we say yes and no to, not on what we didn't know and had no way of knowing.
Right. Yeah, and no way of knowing would fit within that category of a lack of knowledge due to no fault of the person.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's move right along then to our next objection. This is starting to get into the area concerning science, basically. The objections that seem to posit a tension or a conflict between belief in God and trust in science, in the human exploration of the universe based on the scientific method. So this objection says that talk about God is meaningless because such a being is, by definition, beyond what the methods of modern science could possibly detect. So what do you say to that, Karlo?
Well, there's an embedded assumption there, namely that the methods of modern science are the only tools in the tool shed to tell us things about what's real. You see, so notice the implied assumption. This conceived idea of God, well, even if by definition he's beyond what the methods of modern science can tell us about, so that's meaningless. The assumption being only those things that the methods of modern science can tell us about are worth knowing about and are real. Anything beyond those boundaries is meaningless because it's not going to be real. But of course, this is just the philosophical worldview of scientism. This idea that scientific knowledge is the only real kind of knowledge, or that the methods of modern science are the only ways by which we can come to know what is real. But of course, this philosophical view, this way of thinking about the world, is self-defeating, Thomas, precisely because there is no scientific experiment or mathematical equation, there's no method of modern science that we could employ in order to know the truth of that very claim, namely that scientific knowledge is the only real kind of knowledge, or the claim that the methods of modern science alone tell us about what is real. Those are two claims that cannot be known as the product of the methods of modern science, in which case, Thomas, these two claims that I just articulated are not scientific knowledge. They're not the product of the methods of modern science. Well, if you think about that, if they aren't scientific knowledge, if these knowledge claims aren't the product of the methods of scientific knowledge, and of course scientism says that scientific knowledge is the only real kind of knowledge, well then these two claims wouldn't be real knowledge. Scientism itself would not be real knowledge according to the very principle of scientism. You see, and so it's self-defeating. It's like, the snake eating its own tail. Whenever you apply the principle of scientism to itself, you come to see that scientism is refuted. It ends up not being real knowledge. And if it's not real knowledge and it's not true, well, then we ought not to embrace it. And so this is the major problem of this sort of objection. Rejecting religious belief, rejecting talk about God, precisely because it's beyond the boundaries of what modern science can tell us. And of course, that's just assuming the truth of scientism, which, as I've articulated here, is false.
I think the other really compelling argument against the scientism worldview is that science really doesn't tell us anything about morality. It can't articulate moral principles for us. It can describe what is the world around us, what we see, what goes on around us, but it can't tell us what ought to be. One tweet I saw one time, because I'm the social media manager, one tweet I saw summed it up really well. He said, "Show me the science experiment that proves murder is wrong."
Right. That would be the claim that murder is wrong cannot be the product of using the methods of modern science, in which case it's not scientific knowledge understood in the modern sense, not the Aristotelian sense. And so according to the principle of scientism, if this is a claim that's not scientific knowledge, well, then it wouldn't be real knowledge. But of course, most people would acknowledge, based upon at least moral intuition, that taking the life of an innocent human being is indeed wrong, and we would claim that's real knowledge. That's accurately describing or mapping on to reality. And so therefore, we would be able to conclude that scientism is indeed false.
Yeah, it's a really strong way to strike a blow against scientism, because, like you said, we all have really strong moral intuitions about many basic moral truths. Only a few people would bite the bullet and just go ahead and say that morality doesn't actually exist. I don't think anyone. I actually am very adamant about pushing folks to really think about justifying those moral intuitions. There are a lot of other philosophers that do that as well. Like, for example, taking the life of an innocent human being, especially within the abortion debates, many people, including most quote-unquote pro-life politicians, deny that claim because they think in some cases it's okay to take the life of an innocent human being. And so there you have a strong moral intuition that's waning. And so it's necessary and imperative for us to provide a robust philosophical justification of the intuition, which I did. I wrote a piece for Catholic Answers magazine online. I think it's entitled, "What if it's okay to kill innocent people?" or something like that, where I try to use St. Thomas Aquinas as my guide and to pull from certain principles that he articulates to provide a robust justification as to why it is always immoral, intrinsically evil, to take the life of an innocent human being. And of course, that's important because, again, as I mentioned, those moral intuitions can wane. And that's important for our purposes here whenever we're appealing to these real objective moral truths or truths about human behavior. That can be part of the evidence for us to argue for God's existence and, of course, refute certain atheistic objections. So not only moral intuitions can be brought in for evidence, but in case you have some who are going to push back on those intuitions, we need to have some good philosophical foundations for those intuitions. And isn't that interesting how just a debate that seems to be as abstract and detached as as arguing for God's existence can actually get down to brass tacks really, really quickly once you realize the consequences of maybe denying this or that truth, like a really strong moral truth.
Yeah. For example, if we take, for example, the moral argument, or at least I would say a particular version of the moral argument, like we recognize we have intuitively this obligation to do right and avoid evil. So notice, we're talking about what's at the heart of human existence and behavior, the obligation to do good. And of course, that comes into play with arguments for God's existence.
Well, that brings us to our middle break of this hour, and if you haven't been able to tell already, it's refuting the strongest arguments against God, the strongest atheist arguments. We will be right back to continue that right after this.
What is the Catholic Church? Everyone seems to have an opinion, but the Church never quite fits into the boxes people make for it. In The Faith Unboxed, author Andrew Petiprin looks at some of the most common boxes people put the Catholic Church in and explains why they don't fit. In doing so, he brings us closer to what the Church really is, the institution founded by Christ. Order The Faith Unboxed today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
The stigmata, the appearance of Christ's wounds on ordinary believers. Is it real or fake? What's the evidence? And if real, what could God's reason be for causing this? In God's Wounds, author John Clark offers what may be the most thorough, honest, and faithful reckoning with the stigmata ever written, examining the evidence and making sense of it both medically and spiritually. Order God's Wounds today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We are refuting the strongest atheist arguments here with Dr. Karlo Broussard, apologist, speaker, Catholic Answers, philosophy knower. I think that's a good way to summarize it in a little more digestible way than theologian and philosopher. I think that works for a popular audience, don't you, Karlo?
Well, let's say an inquirer of reality who has come to know at least a few things about reality.
There we go.
And that could apply to the philosopher or the theologian.
There we go. Very, very, very well put, Karlo. My name is Thomas Graff. I'm the social media manager here at Catholic Answers, filling in for Cy Kellett today. He will be back with us on Wednesday. Until then, you have me. You have Edgar tomorrow, who will be filling in as well. He's all jazzed up to do that, I know. And we are all jazzed up to keep getting through these objections. And by the way, if you do want to join the conversation, we are happy to have your call. 888-318-7884 is the number to call if you want to get in here with your own atheist argument, your own argument against the existence of God, whether it's one that you personally believe or if you are a believer in God and you've been caught off guard by a tough argument that we haven't covered here yet. Give us a call, 888-318-7884, and we will put you on with Dr. Karlo Broussard and let him at it. In the meantime, we're going to get back to these questions that we have already. And so we've explained, or rather, Karlo, you've explained the answer to one of the science-based objections we have here. And basically that objection rested on scientism, which is the self-refuting belief that the only legitimate kind of knowledge is that which is achieved through modern scientific methods. Now, there's another science-based objection we have here, and this gets to a slightly different angle. It says even if God did exist, we don't need him to explain the universe because science can explain the universe just fine without God.
Yeah, it can get the job done. You might identify this as sort of a weak version of scientism, as opposed to the previous objection, which could be labeled a strong version of scientism. This weak version of scientism was actually put forward by the late Stephen Hawking in a 2010 debate that he did with my former boss, whom I used to work with, Father Robert Spitzer at the Maggia Center, on the Larry King Live show. And Stephen Hawking actually said, the creator might exist, but we don't need him because science is sufficient to get the job done. Now, in response, we should immediately be suspect of this sort of claim precisely because of the inductive method with which science works. Science, in principle, given its methods, must always be open to discovering new data that could potentially alter its current theories that attempt to explain what it observes, to explain reality. And once you understand that particular method of science and the methods of modern science, you come to see that it's virtually impossible that science could discover every piece of data within the entire physical cosmos that would be necessary and sufficient to explain the physical cosmos. So even just the very method of modern science itself counts against this sort of claim that science could be sufficient to get the job done and explain the universe without the need to appeal to God to account for it. And then now, secondly, I think furthermore, which is sort of a definitive refutation of this claim, is that science presupposes certain features of reality in order for it to even do its work. So, for example, science presupposes that physical things actually exist. All right? So if that's the case, well, then science in principle cannot explain why those things exist rather than not exist. So science is limping already in trying to give a sufficient explanatory explanation of the physical cosmos. Here's another thing, Thomas, that science presupposes or assumes to be real. In order to engage in scientific experiments, you have to have change. Like if I wanted to measure the temperature, like what degree of heat would be required to melt wax from a solid state into a liquid state? Well, notice in order for me to conduct that experiment, I have to already assume that change is a real feature of reality. That's necessary. Now, if science presupposes change, even for it to do its work, well, then science in principle cannot explain change, nor can it account for why there is change rather than no change, you see? And so if science presupposes a variety of features of the physical cosmos itself, well, then in principle, it follows that it cannot, in principle, sufficiently explain the universe, much less explain it in such a way that it could negate the need for a creator. And then my final thought is that those very features of reality, of the physical world, that science presupposes in order for it to get off the ground and start doing its work, are the very features that we as theists see and argue as the starting points for reasoning to God's existence. And so change, for example, I just said how science presupposes change, and so in principle cannot account for why there is change rather than no change. So it's already in principle insufficient to give a complete explanation of the physical cosmos. But that change itself, so St. Thomas Aquinas argues in his first way in the Summa Theologiae, is the very starting point for reasoning to God's existence. So if science presupposes features of reality that are the starting points for God's existence and evidence for God's existence, then it follows that science in principle cannot negate the need for God because it's presupposing things that need God. And so hopefully that's clear enough, and you can see that. What do you think about that, Thomas?
I think that's fascinating how the same point of departure for both science and God, or the arguments for the existence of God, it kind of goes in both directions there. You see what I mean? Like you can start from the assumption that motion is real and that physical things exist, and you can like reason downward, as it were, to look at everything we can observe about the universe about this, and then you can also reason upward by taking those principles and saying, now this can only be accounted for by an infinite creator, right? It's fascinating how there's that touch point between natural science and then natural theology.
Yeah, and so to state it even perhaps more provocative is that you need God in order to do science. Mm-hmm. Because you need things within the physical world existing, which God accounts for, so we would argue ultimately. And so therefore, you need God in order and science presupposes those physical things, and so therefore it follows that you need God in order to do science. Of course, just stating it like that is not going to be received by most, but we can summarize the reality behind it. And so it would require some unpacking, but it is indeed a true statement.
I think you've earned that statement with the depth of explanation that you gave before. I think you're justified in being that bold with a statement like that.
Very kind of you, Thomas.
It's my job as a host. I'm supposed to butter you up. Don't read too much into it.
Can science prove that you're kind? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
So maybe if scientism is true, then that was a meaningless statement by me to say that you were kind.
Good point. Although that is a very high burden of proof as well. One has to dig very, very deep to see if I'm kind at all. That's just part of my abrasive personality. I would blame that. I would blame that on being the social media manager. Actually, I think the longer you stare into that abyss, the harder it is to prove that you're kind, scientifically or not. All right, enough about me. I'm only the host. I got to get out of the way. 888-318-7884 is the number to call if you want to get in on this conversation. Not about whether I'm kind. We're leaving that in the back door. In the rearview mirror, but just to get in on the conversation about the strongest atheist arguments. If you want to present your question, your atheist argument to Karlo, call 888-318-7884. Before we do that, before we get into more arguments, we do want to get into our final break. And before we get into our break, I want to remind you that this September 25th to 28th, coming up this month, at the end of the following month, rather. We're going to be gathering here in San Diego with some of the nation's most brilliant, eloquent, and engaging Catholic speakers as they share the good news of Jesus Christ and his church at our Catholic Answers National Conference. Just probably the most fun 4 days. Probably the most fun 4 days that any of us at Catholic Answers have is when we get to see a whole hundreds of our friends gather at the Hyatt Regency in La Jolla here in San Diego. As Chris Check says, our president Chris Check says, it's the greatest Catholic party on earth. I don't think he's exaggerating there. Important qualifier on earth, the greatest Catholic party, period, is heaven. But if you want to get close to that, you can come to the Catholic Answers Conference September 25th to 28th here in San Diego. You can see all of our Catholic Answers speakers, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists like Dr. Karlo Broussard, Trent Horn, Joe Heschmeyer, Jimmy Akin, Tim Staples. You can also see Cy Kellett, and you can see some of our friends such as Chris Stefanik, Dr. David Anders, Dr. Amy Hamilton, Steve Dawson of the St. Paul Street Evangelization Network, who are good friends. And like I said, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists, talking about the theme of going and making disciples, which is what we're all about here at Catholic Answers, like helping you guys to do the work of evangelization that our Lord left to us. You can get $50 off your conference ticket by using the promo code EARLY at CatholicAnswersConference.com. That's the three words, Catholic Answers Conference, altogether.com. The promo code EARLY, that's how you spell the word, EARLY, saves you $50 off your conference ticket. So book your tickets now. Don't be late. Don't forget, it is at the end of next month, so do it now. Don't wait. We'll be right back to continue refuting the strongest atheist arguments right after this.
It's all about the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
You know, I have never seen women who want to be equal absolutely degrading themselves. And yet the media degrades your nature, your beauty as a woman, your goodness. Let us pray at some point our dear Lord touches their hearts.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Thomas Graff. I'm the social media manager here at Catholic Answers most days, but right now I'm filling in for Cy Kellett, who is on vacation back to his hometown of Boston. He will be back with us on Wednesday, but for now, we are refuting the strongest atheist arguments here on Catholic Answers. If you want to join the conversation, you can call us at 888-318-7884 to contribute maybe your own atheist argument to the show or a follow-up on a previous answer that we gave to another atheist argument. For now, though, we're going to keep rolling right along with our guest, Dr. Karlo Broussard, who has just been killing it so far with these questions, just really digging deep into the muck and pulling out some great apologetic answers, I think. So, Karlo, how about we continue on with what we have so far?
Let's do it, man.
All right. This, I think, is one of the most emotionally charged arguments, and for that reason, in some ways, it's actually one of the strongest arguments. If God is loving, why would He send anyone to eternal punishment in hell?
Yeah, well, my first thought is that hell would not be evidence against God, and therefore a justification for atheism. Rather, it would simply be, let's suppose that hell is somehow inherently contrary to goodness, that it would simply be evidence against Judeo-Christian revelation. So it wouldn't justify atheism. But you normally hear this sort of objection coming from atheists. And I think what's going on there is they're trying to propose or show an alleged incompatibility between an all-good God and the doctrine of hell. But again, like I said, you could just reject the doctrine of hell, and because that's something that's supernaturally revealed, and still hold on to the existence of an all-good God. But let's go ahead and try and answer the question. Because as a Christian, we do affirm the doctrine of hell. And so it is imperative for us to provide an explanation to show the compatibility between the doctrine of hell and the all-good God that we believe in. So this is indeed a challenge that's pressing for us as a Christian. And I think the first thing that comes to mind, Thomas, in response is, remember, what is love? Love is to will the good, right? Now, hell can be consistent with and compatible with an all-good God insofar as God wills the good of justice. And this gets back to this issue of justice. Justice is a manifestation of divine goodness, of divine being. He wills to have an order of providence in which justice is manifest. So how is justice manifest with the doctrine of hell? Well, you have a sin that receives proportionate punishment. A sin that entails the rejection of God, that merits or demerits, if you say, a proportionate punishment. And the everlasting nature of hell is due to the fact that this rejection of God is in fact definitive and everlasting. So insofar as the soul is rejecting God, it merits a proportionate punishment to it. So if the rejection is forever, then the proportionate punishment is forever. And we know philosophically that punishment in and of itself is not contrary to love. Nobody in their right mind would say that a father is being unloving when he punishes his child, assuming that there was a proportionate misdeed or a misbehavior or a sin or something. In fact, love, it is loving to punish whenever there is a proportionate crime, precisely because love wills the good. What is the good? It's the manifestation of God's plan for human behavior. When my son does something bad, he's causing disorder. He's bringing disorder into the whole system of things. And that's not good. So when I punish and I impose some sort of suffering or displeasure upon him, what am I doing? I'm making right what was wronged. I'm bringing order to where there was disorder. And guess what, Thomas? My son needs to know the good of that order. He needs to know the divine design of what ought to be, namely displeasure with bad behavior, pleasure with good behavior. And so when I punish as a father, it is a manifestation of my love, namely willing what's good for him. What's good for him is at least to come to know the truth of God's design concerning human beings and our relationships and human behavior. So for the souls in hell, forever they receive a proportionate punishment, and proportionate punishment is a manifestation of justice, and justice is a good, which God wills. And so that's consistent with his all-loving nature. But it's also consistent with his all-loving nature, Thomas, because forever the damned are being or coming to know, and it is being manifested to them, the truth of God's divine design concerning human behavior. And the displeasure that ought to be associated with bad behavior and the pleasure that ought to be associated with good behavior. So you might say the bottom line is that forever the damned are being dispelled of their illusion that sinful behavior is going to bring them happiness. And that manifestation of truth is a good for the damned. And so insofar as love is willing the good for another, and God is willing that good of the manifestation of truth for the damned, assuming that you have proportionate punishment here, then you can see how hell, this definitive self-exclusion from God, is consistent with and fits within the philosophical framework of God being all-loving. Love and punishment, and in this case, love and eternal punishment or everlasting punishment is indeed compatible when you properly understand the two.
So I think, in my experience, at least seeing this kind of discourse online, the atheist I predict would hone in on that question of proportionality. The follow-up that he would ask would be, how can you say that it is a proportionate punishment? Let's say one act of rejecting God, is that really deserving of an eternity of divine punishment, the most unpleasant thing you could possibly experience, right?
Yeah, so two thoughts in response. First of all, the challenge assumes that the duration of the crime should be equal to the duration of the punishment. But that's an assumption we can legitimately challenge. Anybody can challenge that. I mean, if that were the case, well, then we would all be wrong for putting people in prison for life or putting people in prison for a year when it only took 5 minutes to commit the crime. Mm-hmm. So whenever we appeal to those examples, we can see that that implied assumption is false. The duration of the crime does not have to be equal to the duration of the punishment. Mm-hmm. And so similarly, if that's the case, well, then you can't appeal to the duration of a crime being 5 minutes and complain against an everlasting punishment. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, that raises the question, well, what's going to determine the everlasting punishment? Well, one possible answer is that the infinite dignity and majesty of Almighty God, against whom you sin and reject, that in and of itself is meritorious of proportionate everlasting punishment. It's kind of like, listen, if I go and, if I hit somebody in a bar brawl or something, I don't go in bars and fight. This is just an example. But if I were to do that, that would be there would be a big difference from me hitting some guy in a bar brawl than hitting the president of the United States, say, or the Pope, right? The dignity of the person whom you offend is going to determine the degree of the punishment. So the higher the dignity of the offense, the higher degree of punishment. Well, there's nobody more dignified and majestic than God Almighty, the Creator. And so to offend him, to reject him, demands the highest degree of punishment possible, namely an everlasting separation from him. Now, the second thing I would say here, Thomas, is that the everlasting nature of the punishment is simply a logical consequence of the definitive nature of the rejection of God that the soul goes into the afterlife with. Now, this assumes a whole lot of philosophy going on here. I've written an article at Catholic Answers Magazine online, why the soul cannot change itself after death, I think is the title of it. Dr. Edward Fazer wrote an article, why God damns people, where he articulates this philosophical understanding of how whatever choice the soul makes upon death at the separation from the body, that choice is fixed. It's definitive, because the condition for changing our choices is being united to the body. So once the body is away, the soul's fixed in its choice. And this is the same line of reasoning that's applied to the angels. When the angels were created, they had to make a choice for or against God, and the choice that they made was definitive and fixed. So if the rejection of God subsequent to death, after death, is fixed, well, then it's everlasting. For the rest of that soul's existence, the soul is rejecting God. And if the rejection of God entails a proportionate punishment, well, then for the rest of that soul's existence of rejecting God, it's going to be punished. What is the primary punishment? The not being with God. And then secondarily, the suffering that the soul is going to experience on account of its rejection of God. And so what you have there is an account for why the punishment is everlasting. It's everlasting because the rejection of God is everlasting on account of how spiritual choices work when you're separated from the body.
I think also one of the really convincing or most important points that can't get lost in this discussion about hell and the suffering that it incurs, especially the rejection of God, is a exact understanding of what it is you're rejecting. And that's where it's really important to know like what we're talking about when we mean God, and especially when we talk about rejecting God, because as some of the arguments that we've gone through have shown, you need to understand what God is and what we claim about him, and that is that he is goodness itself, that God is not just the source of all goodness, but the fullness of goodness. Everything that can be good comes from God as its source. So if you reject that, if you reject all goodness, what's left? Only suffering, right? Only torment, only pain. You're separating yourself from the only thing that could possibly release you from that kind of torment.
Yeah, well, there's one goodness that remains for the damned in hell, and that is, well, actually a few. Number one, their very existence. And as I already articulated, the manifestation of the truth of God's divine design concerning human behavior. And that's how it can still be consistent with love, God willing some of these goods for the damned. But you are absolutely right, because I think the problem we have with hell on this side of the veil is precisely because we fail to see the evil nature of a definitive rejection of God, of rejecting God as our life's ultimate end or goal. And that's due to the fact that we're on this side of the veil. But on the other side of the veil, the intellect will be keen in its insight as to how majestic and good God is, and consequently, how evil the rejection of God is. And then we will see the justice of everlasting punishment in hell and how that's compatible with an all-good God.
Well, that about does it for this show of Catholic Answers Live. We just did 2 hours of answering some of the strongest atheist arguments that we could come up with. And Karlo, I think we did a pretty darn good job for what we got through, don't you think?
Well, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I think we did all right. There's always room for improvement, right? But we did our best.
That's right. Well, we'll see if we can improve tomorrow. And so please do join us again. We'll be right back with you, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.